Today's message is about Daniel. Important footnote, Daniel, as far as we know, was never a father. But he has some incredible qualities that I think any father or mother would be good for them to have. He was an amazing person. We can learn a lot about following God from his life. But before I start, I have some true-false questions for you. Now, in order to not embarrass anybody, don't shout what you think it is, because you might be wrong, you might be right. So here's what we would do in school when the kids are around. We go, okay, if you think it's true, go right in like this. If you think it's false, go like that. That way no one's going to know. Because if you go, true, and it's nope, false. And all right, so just give me a this or a this. All right. Okay, first one. True or false? David was a teenager or a young man when he was thrown into the lion's den. Give me an or an He was a teenager or a young man when he got thrown in the lion's den. Okay. All right. I'm going to give you instant feedback. That's false. They figured he was probably 81-ish. That blew me away too, because all the pictures of Daniel in the lion's den is this poor kid getting thrown into the den. No, he was probably 80, 81, 82. Second one, Daniel was in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Give me a or a Okay, instant feedback. He wasn't. He was around. They were his buddies. They were his best buddies. They were all in Babylon together, but those three, it didn't mention anything about Daniel being with them. He was probably around, maybe even watching. I don't know, but he was not in it with them. There was a fourth person in there, though, right? And they didn't know who that was. It looked like he was a son of the gods, so it could have very well have been Jesus Christ, an appearing of Jesus Christ before. Okay, third one. Daniel was the first author in the Bible to use the term Son of Man as a descriptor of Christ. Yeah, or a And instant feedback, that is a He was the first one to use Son of Man as a descriptor of Christ. Ezekiel had it 92 times, at least 90 times in the book of Ezekiel talking about Son of Man, but he was referring to, in this case, himself. Or like God said, listen, Son of Man, you don't know this, and Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man. But Daniel, in one verse, or a couple of verses in that Bible, talked about, I saw, in fact, we'll get to that. It's one of the slides. So Daniel was the first one to use it as a descriptor of Christ. And Christ used that example later on in the New Testament. Okay, last one. Daniel interpreted the handwriting on the wall. Which one is it? This one could go either way. Technically, Daniel didn't interpret anything. God told him, but Daniel was the one who spoke to the king and said, this is what the handwriting says on the wall. So those are iconic things out of Daniel. The lion's den, we've all heard about that. Oh, I was in a lion's den over there, used, whether it was or not used today. Iconic from Daniel. The fiery furnace, boy, that was a fiery furnace it got thrown into. That was out of Daniel. Son of Man. And I saw the handwriting on the wall. You heard that phrase? Well, I saw the handwriting on the wall and I got out of there, right? Okay, so we'll talk about a few of these things during this lesson. So who was Daniel? His name means God is my judge. Yet when he was taken captive from Jerusalem into Babylon in about the year 605 BC, the Babylonians attempted to erase his identity by renaming him Belteshazzar. They wanted to change not only his name, but his values, his worship, and his loyalty. But they discovered something powerful. You can change a man's location without changing his devotion. So Israel, for years, had been warned by the prophets, you're turning away from God. You're going to be overthrown. Well, finally, in 605 BC, it happened. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered Israel and took some of the finest young men back to Babylon to teach them. They looked for young, handsome men who seemed like they would be good for the kingdom of Babylon, and Daniel was one of them, as well as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, why am I talking about Daniel when we're talking about today in the 21st century? Well, Daniel lived in a pagan culture. He was transported 600 and some miles away from Jerusalem. That's, can you imagine in ancient times, 600 miles is like 6,000 miles today. Served under pagan kings, faced constant pressure to compromise, yet through it all he remained faithful to the Lord. And at church, we are kind of living in similar days. We're kind of living in a pagan culture in many ways. We see nations drifting from God. We see truth questioned. We see pressure to conform to the spirit of the age. The story of Daniel reminds us that God still calls his people to stand firm. So, the first point of this sermon, of 5 points, is that God can use you wherever he places you. I used to think that missionaries were people who only went overseas. Because when I was 12, 13 years old, a pastor that came to our church, he wanted to be a missionary. And he was studying to do that. He was here for a few years, terrific guy. But he was going to be a missionary over in Africa. And I thought, okay, that's what missionaries do. You go somewhere else and you preach. But that's not it. God can use you for sure as a missionary going overseas, but wherever you are, here, right now, we're missionaries right now. We are missionaries. So a quick review. I'm not going to read all the verses here, but in Daniel chapter 1, it talks about here. I'm going to read part of it fairly quickly for you because I have a few things to go over on that. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, so that was Israel, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. And Nebuchadnezzar also took vessels of the house of God out of the temple. He took these treasured holy vessels, like cups and urns and various things like that, and took them to Babylon with him. And as well as some of these young men that he was going to retrain. And youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and the wine that he drank. Incidentally, these were things also offered to idols as well. So they were, according to the Israelites, they were not supposed to have any part of that. So these kids were Daniel was 15 years old at the time, just a young guy. King assigned them daily portion, and they were going to be educated for 3 years, and then they could finally enter his service. Well, among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they became Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel basically said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not eating your food, I'm not drinking your wine. Just give us vegetables and water. And just a quick short summary, and the person in charge of them said, I can't do that. I can't go to Nebuchadnezzar. By the way, Nebuchadnezzar would have been probably the most powerful man on earth at the time. Egypt was also pretty powerful back then, but Babylon was it. You saw previously in the map so most powerful man on earth can order your instant death, even if you're his servant. So Daniel's saying, we're not eating this stuff that these other people are eating. And this says, I'm not going to tell the king this. And Daniel said, well, here's the deal. Give us 2 weeks. We're going to eat the water and vegetables. The other guys can eat the king's food. And at the end of 2 weeks, if we don't look better than them, then he probably still wasn't going to eat it, But so the guy said, okay, we'll try it. Tried it for 2 weeks. Guess what? The guys eating the vegetables and water, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, way better off looking after 2 weeks than the other people were. So, in fact, the king spoke to them. Nebuchadnezzar took a look at them and looked among them and all the rest. And I want to read this verse 19 in chapter 1. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. So these guys, they blew everyone else away on the testing. So, and Daniel stood there, and it says the last verse, Daniel was there till the first year of King Cyrus. That was almost 70 years later. So he was 70 some years in Babylon, from 15 till he died in his 80s. He never got to go back to Jerusalem. It was always at 600 and some miles away. So Daniel served as an advisor to kings and administrators in government, the most powerful on earth, for 70 years. What an amazing testimony. Different kings came and went. Kingdoms rose and fell, but Daniel remained faithful. Sometimes God places us in difficult environments, and not to destroy our witness, but to display it. You may work in a place where no one honors God. You may attend a school hostile to your faith. You may feel outnumbered spiritually, but God can still use you there. Main point number 2, stay true to the Lord even when the going gets tough. So one of those first tests, Daniel was only 15 years old. But the king said, you will eat this food. Daniel says, not going to happen. So that it worked. Another one, the fiery furnace. Now here's where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come in. They're about, I want to say, 22 years, so about 7 years later. Daniel was probably 22 years old. His buddies were about that same age, their young 20s. King Nebuchadnezzar, most powerful man on earth, built a solid gold statue. And at first you hear 60 cubits by 6 cubits. You go, okay, what does that mean? A cubit is about 1.5 feet, so think 90 feet tall, so about twice as high as a flagpole. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, solid gold. I don't know if the statue was of him, but it was a statue of some sort. I think it might have been of him, but I can't guarantee that. I'd have to go back and look. And these advisors to the king said, oh, king, let's have it that whenever you play a bunch of music or have and they mentioned a horn, a pipe, a lyre, a trigon, whatever that is, a harp, a bagpipe, and every kind of music, order everybody to immediately fall down where they're at and worship that idol, even if they can't see it. Make that a law. And if they don't, they're going to get thrown in a furnace. Not just a little Ben Franklin cook stove or whatever, but a huge furnace. And the king thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know how he got to be king, right? But that was the rule. So they did, and then all these other people who were jealous of these young men because Nebuchadnezzar thought they were it, right? They were the best. And that's partly why they might have done it. They hear all of a sudden this music would go off and everyone falls down and worships except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not going to do it. And of course someone had to tell on them, tattletales, right? Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, isn't that the law that everyone's supposed to fall down and worship this 90-foot image? Those 3 aren't. And Nebuchadnezzar said, you better not be. So he comes in and brings those 3 to him and says, I understand you're not falling down and worshiping when we're playing the music. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, let's see, this is chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, king talks to them. He came in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the image that I have made. Well and good. Things will go well for you. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the fiery furnace. And what God can deliver you out of those hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, most powerful man on earth, remember, these are just 22-year-olds. Of course, 22-year-olds probably would say that. I think they would. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we're still not going to serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. Say the bottom line, yeah, if God rescues us, great. If he doesn't, we die, so what? I'm still not going to do it. Then Nebuchadnezzar was really mad. That's what it said, really mad, filled with fury. And he ordered the furnace heated to 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered them bound and thrown in. In fact, the fire was so hot that the people throwing them in perished, burnt up immediately. They were thrown into the fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound, hands behind their backs maybe, or hands behind, not sure, into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, who must have been standing back quite a ways, was astonished and stood up in haste. And he looked. He declared to his counselors, "Didn't we just cast 3 men into that fire?" They answered and said to him, "Oh, yes, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. An appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace, declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come on out and come here." And then they came out to him. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. They weren't all, like you've seen in a cartoon, they come out smoking. The hair of their heads was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed. No smell of fire had even come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." So now here's his next decree. "Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." The king then promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Amazing. Another item from Daniel, which was stand firm, even things get tough, was the handwriting on the wall. Now, fast forward quite a few years later. Daniel's in his 80s right now. It's Nebuchadnezzar had already died. He's had a kid and a grandkid rule and a series of others, and then there's finally this one named Belshazzar, not Belteshazzar, which was Daniel's new name, but Belshazzar, who was kind of a sort of a jerk. He was also not the new emperor of Babylon. He made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. It was a huge party. And he commanded that vessels of gold that were stolen from the Jewish temple and that Babylon had, we're going to pour our wine that we're having in those vessels. So these sacred treasures of the temple in Jerusalem, he's going to have a big orgy party with them and use that to put the wine in. And then all of a sudden, fingers of a human hand appear on the wall in his castle. And by the way, he's starting to be surrounded by the Medo-Persians. So Babylon's about to fall. The Persians are going to take over. But the king's having a party. Fingers start writing on the wall, and no one knows what it is. Everyone's freaking out because this giant hand appears on the wall and writes the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Perez. And the king's everyone's just like stopped their party and they're looking, what does that mean? And he's saying, okay, well, who can interpret this? And he brought all his magicians there and nobody could figure out what that was. And the queen said, there's this guy named Daniel that you've had. he's interpreted dreams before. Because if you read the book of Daniel, fascinating book, he has interpreted a couple different dreams for Nebuchadnezzar and things like that too. So he brought Daniel, he was 80 years old at the time, and says, can you interpret that? And he says, basically Daniel answered him, mentioning that wise men and enchanters, I've heard that you can give interpretations to solve problems. Can you read this writing? Daniel answered and said before the king, oh, he said, by the way, if you do this right, if you can interpret this, you get to be third in my kingdom. I'm going to give you a purple robe and a gold necklace, and you get to be third in power in my kingdom. Daniel answered and said, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. This is verse 17 of chapter 5. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. Because of the greatness he gave him, all peoples, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. So he talked a little bit more, and he said, bottom line is, Belshazzar, you have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of this house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. This is Daniel, 81 years old, telling the most powerful man on earth now, almost, that he messed up. You have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron and stone, which do not hear or know. This is what the handwriting says. Mene means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So this is a message that Daniel had to deliver to basically one of the most powerful men on earth at that time. You're done. You're done, fella. Goodbye. It's over this night. And you think Belshazzar is going to kill him, right? He didn't. He said, bring him the robe, give him the necklace, and that very night the Medes and Persians came in and they slew the king, killed him, and the Persian Cyrus and Darius, the Persians took over Babylon. Babylon fell, and hard. So that's another, it would have been really easy for Daniel to look at that handwriting and with all the horrible bad news on it and go, not sure what it means, king. I'm just going to go back to my room now. See you later, right? But he said, no, okay, this is it. The hard truth was, and then of course the lion's den. This was about a year or two later. Cyrus and Darius are now rulers. Babylon has fallen. It's the Medo-Persians that run the whole Mideast at that point. And someone said to Cyrus, or actually Cyrus was the main ruler, and Darius is the one who was the specific ruler over Daniel at that point. His counselors, advisors said, Darius, you're so awesome. Let's make it a rule for the next, I can't remember how many days, no one can pray to any god except for you. They can only pray to you, O king. And Darius said, great idea. Right? I mean, seriously. But that's the rule. The only praying can be to me for the next few days. I think it was a 30-day. Don't quote me on the numbers. I should probably be a little more accurate, but sorry. Anyway, you go read Daniel. You'll know. What do you think Daniel's going to say about that? Nah. He opens up his doors to facing Jerusalem, prays 3 times a day to his God, and guess what? Those advisors talk to Darius. Daniel's praying to another god and not you. And Darius was devastated. It only took him a little while. Daniel must have been one charming, amazing guy. All the rulers absolutely loved him. These pagan rulers, different rulers. Darius, after just maybe a year or so, loved him already. And he's going, oh, God. Because the rule was you're going to get thrown to the lions if you pray to any other god except for Darius. So, but basically his advisors told him, well, you have to throw Daniel in the lion's den now. So he did. Threw Daniel to the lion's den, and he was worried, stayed up all night worrying about him. came back the next day and ran to where they kept him, and Daniel was fine. And so I just want to read it. It's just so cool to read that part here. At the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den, this is verse 19 and 20 in chapter 6 of Daniel. As he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever." In other words, yes, right? "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, I shouldn't like this part, but I kind of like it. I want to apologize and ask forgiveness for liking this part of Daniel. The king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they and their wives and their children. Yeah, bummer for the wives and children. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. So that's what happened to the accusers. And King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." So another pagan king going, this God that Daniel serves, he's the real deal. So you better tremble and fear before him. For he is a living God. This is Darius saying this, a pagan king. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow to a golden image. Daniel refused to stop praying to the one true God. Faithfulness begins long before the lion's den or the fiery furnace. Public victory came because of private obedience. And that was the lions. Oops, I was supposed to show you the lion's den. There's Daniel. Looks a little older there, but a lot of it usually shows a teenager in the lion's den. But can you imagine that? Main point number 3 is that prayer is what gives strength to stand. Daniel didn't wait until he was thrown into the lion's den to pray. Right? Like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now, I'm going to pray. And too often I find myself in that predicament. Uh-oh, things are getting rough. I'm going to start praying now. Lord, help me out of this mess. Lord, help me out of this mess. He was not fearless because he was naturally brave. Daniel wasn't. He was strong because he prayed. He did front-loading. Call it front-loading. Let's start praying now. Remember, Paul says, pray without ceasing. Rejoice always, praise without ceasing. It means now. Now. So when King Darius signed a decree that no one could pray to any god except the king, Daniel did not panic. He did not hide. He did not stop praying. The Bible tells us he went home, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed just as he always had done. Even when he knew it would cost him his life. It could. And because of his faithfulness, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. But listen to the powerful words of Scripture, Daniel 6:22. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. The book of Daniel teaches us, petition God in prayer, even if you think you are the only one doing it. You're not alone. God always has faithful people. Prayer is not our last resort, it's our lifeline. If we want strength in a trial, we must build a relationship with God before that crisis comes. Although, if you're a procrastinator like me, you can certainly come to him in a crisis, right? For sure. For sure. God gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams and visions. Kings sought him out because the Spirit of God was on him. Daniel 5:12 says, this man Daniel was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Daniel listened to the voice of God, and God used him in amazing ways. God still speaks to us through His Word by His Spirit today. The question is, are we listening? God is looking for believers who walk in holiness, remain humble, seek Him daily, and are willing to obey. Oops, sorry, missed that one. Yes, wait a second. God honors faithfulness. Last point, patience. God works over time. Interesting, I think this slide, yes. Take a look at the age here. What happened with his captivity? First of all, taken from Jerusalem, his only home that he ever knew. He's 15 years old, 605 BC. A few years later, started interpreting dreams, fiery furnace, 22 years old. Interpretation of a tree dream, that was on Nebuchadnezzar, by the way. A quick one on that one. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream about a great big tree, and no one, his other magicians, could not interpret it. And so Daniel did. And he said, oh, King, that's you. You've become very powerful, and you've not been honoring God. So you're going to basically go crazy for about 7 years. You're going to eat the grass in the field for 7 years. This is the most powerful man on earth. And Nebuchadnezzar had him interpret that. Again, Daniel, if I would have seen an interpretation like that, and the king asked me, the most powerful man on earth, would I have had the courage to go, you know what, you're going to go crazy for 7 years, going to eat grass just like a cow, but have a good day, see ya. But he did. He told it, this is what God said, this is what's going on. He was about 50 something then the last bit. They think Daniel probably died when he was like mid-80s or so, something like that. The handwriting on the wall, his vision of the Son of Man in the lion's den. So this is not instant, right? You know, he could have prayed, Lord, get me out of this mess when I'm 15. And a few months later, Lord, you haven't got me out of this mess yet. I'm not in Jerusalem yet. What's going on? Lord, you've totally abandoned me. You could have had that way. I'm in a pagan culture the rest of my life. He never went back to Jerusalem. But he was faithful where he was planted. God works over time. It's not a quick success story. It lasted decades. He served under Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. Long years of waiting, serving, praying, and enduring. Daniel teaches us it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. And his Son of Man passage, the one that Jesus used a lot when he says, I am the Son of Man, and the Jews are ready to stone him before saying it. It was that particular passage in Daniel, those verses, Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14, talking about the end times. This has not happened yet. It's when Christ returns. He said, Daniel saw this vision. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. That's God the Father. And they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Kings rise and fall, have for thousands and thousands of years. Christ is not going to fall. He is coming back. Why does this matter today? Culture calls evil good. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Nations drift from truth. 2 Timothy 4:3 and 4. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. We cannot control culture. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. By testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. And Daniel's courage in dark times. Daniel 6:10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Our challenge, dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose firm. Dare to make it known. Will you stand when others compromise? Will you remain faithful when obedience costs? When others stay silent? Trust God in the lion's den? His legacy of faithfulness, wisdom, courage, consistent prayer life, patience, and trust. For every guy on Father's Day, whether you're a father or not, dare to lead by faith. Stand alone if needed. Be a prayerful example of family and community. And closing prayer. We'll bow our heads real quickly here. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the example of Daniel, a man who remained faithful even in the midst of a corrupt and hostile culture. Lord, help us to stand firm in our convictions. Give us courage not to compromise with the world, even in the small things. Strengthen our prayer lives so that we may remain close to you in every season. Teach us to trust you when life becomes difficult. Help us to remember that you are sovereign over every kingdom, every trial, and every circumstance. We just ask that you raise up men and women today who will dare to be different, dare to obey you, dare to stand alone if necessary. May we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ and remain faithful until the very end. In the name of Jesus we pray, and the people said, Amen.